Alexander Pierce stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching rain cascade down the glass. The Seattle skyline was a blur of grey and steel, matching his mood. At 35, he had everything money could buy. Pierce Technologies was valued at billions. His face graced magazine covers, and his name topped Forbes lists. Yet on days like this, the emptiness echoed through his modern glass and chrome empire. The weight of success felt particularly heavy today, the anniversary of his father's passing. The man who had taught him that nothing mattered more than building a legacy. A knock interrupted his brooding. "Mr. Pierce, your 9 a.m. is here," his assistant Claire announced, her efficiency as impeccable as always. She'd been with him for 5 years, managing his life with military precision. "Send them in," he replied, straightening his Italian suit. Another day, another merger to negotiate. The routine had become almost mundane. He could practically recite the meetings in his sleep. Ambitious startups seeking funding, established companies hoping to partner, all of them seeing dollar signs when they looked at him. The meeting dragged on, filled with projections and proposals. Alexander's mind wandered to his morning routine, the same coffee shop, the same carefully orchestrated schedule. He'd built his life on control and precision, leaving nothing to chance. His personal chef prepared the same breakfast every morning, 2 eggs over medium, whole grain toast, fresh fruit. His driver took the same route to the office, avoiding the unpredictable traffic on the main streets. Even his workouts were scheduled to the minute. The young CEO across the table was still talking, his enthusiasm evident in his gesturing hands. Alexander had already made his decision 10 minutes into the presentation. The technology was promising, but the leadership was too inexperienced. They needed seasoning before he'd consider an investment. "Thank you for your time," Alexander said, rising smoothly to his feet. "Claire will be in touch with our decision." The dismissal was polite but firm, a skill he'd perfected over years of business dealings. After the meeting, he stood again at the windows, watching the city below. Seattle was his kingdom in many ways. Pierce Technologies employed thousands, their influence touching everything from software to biotechnology. His father would have been proud, he thought, though the man had never been one for obvious displays of approval, until chance decided to throw him a curveball. Later that afternoon, rushing to another meeting, Alexander cut through Madison Park. The rain had finally stopped, leaving puddles that reflected the cloudy sky. He checked his watch. He was already running late, thanks to a delayed conference call with their Tokyo office. The merger was complicated, involving multiple international regulations and a time zone ballet that gave him headaches. The park was quieter than usual, the earlier rain having driven away the usual crowd of joggers and dog walkers. His shoes clicked against the wet pavement, the sound echoing off the trees. A few brave souls were emerging from their shelter, parents with children wrapped in colorful raincoats, elderly couples sharing umbrellas. A child's scream pierced the air. Alexander's head snapped up. Near the pond, a little girl with copper-colored curls was running, terror on her face. Behind her, a man in a dark hoodie was gaining ground. The scene was so incongruous with the peaceful park setting that for a moment Alexander thought he was seeing things. Without thinking, Alexander sprinted toward them. His polished Oxford shoes slipped on wet grass, but years of martial arts training, another carefully scheduled part of his routine, kept his balance. The man grabbed the girl's backpack, decorated with cartoon butterflies, and she stumbled, her small hands reaching out to break her fall. "Hey!" Alexander's voice boomed across the park, the command in his tone honed by years in boardrooms. The would-be kidnapper hesitated for a split second, clearly not expecting interference. It was enough. Alexander closed the distance, throwing himself between the girl and her pursuer. The man took one look at Alexander's 6'2" frame, impeccably suited but radiating dangerous intent, and fled, disappearing into the trees. Alexander turned to the little girl, who was trembling but unharmed. "Are you okay?" he asked, kneeling to her level, not caring about the mud now staining his designer trousers. She nodded, tears streaming down her freckled face. Her green eyes were wide with fear, but there was a strength in them that struck him. "I want my mummy," she whispered, her voice quavering but determined. "We'll find her," Alexander promised, pulling out his phone to call the police. As he dialed, he studied the girl more carefully. She couldn't be more than 6, with a heart-shaped face, and those striking green eyes that seemed oddly familiar. Her school uniform, St. Catherine's Academy, he noted from the emblem, was slightly muddy from her fall, but she held herself with a natural grace that seemed beyond her years. "I'm Sophie," she offered, hiccuping slightly. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so childlike and brave, it tugged at something in his chest. "I'm Alexander." "You're very brave, Sophie." He meant it. Many adults would have been hysterical after such an experience, but she was already regaining her composure, though her small hands still trembled. The police arrived quickly, their sirens splitting the park's renewed quiet. They were followed almost immediately by a frantic woman with the same copper-colored hair as Sophie, running across the wet grass with a desperation that made Alexander's heart clench. "Baby!" she cried, running toward them. Alexander's world tilted on its axis. He knew that voice, knew that face, though he hadn't seen it in 7 years. Memories rushed back, a chance meeting at a charity gala, a night of connection that went beyond the physical, morning light streaming through hotel windows. Emma Carter, the art curator who had made him laugh for the first time since his father's diagnosis. Emma, who had seen past his wealth to the man beneath, who had challenged his views on modern art and life itself. And then, nothing. She disappeared, leaving only a note saying it was better this way. "Emma?" he breathed, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Emma Carter froze, her arms around Sophie. The color drained from her face as she looked up at him. Those same hazel eyes he'd dreamed about for months after their encounter, now widened with recognition and something else, fear. The years had been kind to her. She was still beautiful, though there were new lines around her eyes, a maturity that hadn't been there before. "Alexander," she whispered. Her grip on Sophie tightened, an instinctively protective gesture that sent alarm bells ringing through his mind. Sophie looked between them, confusion clear on her face. Her green eyes, his eyes, how had he not seen it immediately, darted from one adult to the other. "Mommy, you know him?" The question hung in the air like suspended rain. Alexander's gaze was drawn back to Sophie's features, the determined chin, the shape of her eyes, the way she held herself, all so familiar, all reflecting the face he saw in the mirror every morning. The timeline clicked into place with devastating clarity. "Emma," he said again, his voice hoarse. "How old is Sophie?" Emma stood, pulling Sophie behind her protectively. Her hand trembled as she brushed her daughter's curls back. "She's 6, she answered, her voice barely audible above the park's ambient sounds. 6 years. 7 years ago. The math was simple, but its implications were earth-shattering. All his careful planning, his controlled life, meant nothing in the face of this revelation. He had a daughter he hadn't known existed, who had been living just miles from him, who he had saved today by pure chance. Or was it fate? Before Alexander could process this revelation, his phone buzzed insistently. The merger meeting. He was now officially very late. For the first time in his career, he didn't care. Board members, shareholders, international partners, none of them mattered in this moment. "We need to talk," he said to Emma, who was already backing away, her hand firmly clasped around Sophie's. He noticed she wore no wedding ring, though that meant little in today's world. "I have to get Sophie home," Emma replied, her voice shaking. "She's been through enough today." Her eyes pleaded with him to understand, to let them go, but he couldn't. Not now, not after discovering this. "Please," Alexander said, surprising himself with the desperation in his voice. "Coffee? Tomorrow?" He was Alexander Pierce. He didn't beg, didn't plead, except now he was, and he didn't care. Emma hesitated, then nodded slightly. The daily grind on 5th, 9 a.m. The same coffee shop he went to every morning, he realized with a start. Had they been crossing paths all these years without knowing? "I'll be there." Alexander watched them walk away, Sophie chattering to her mother about how the tall man had saved her, already bouncing back with the resilience of childhood. His perfectly ordered world had just been turned upside down, and for once, he had no contingency plan, no carefully prepared strategy to fall back on. As he finally headed to his delayed meeting, his mind was far from profit margins and market shares. It was filled with copper curls, green eyes, and questions that had waited 7 years for answers. Questions about choices made, paths not taken, and the possibility of second chances. In his pocket, his phone buzzed again. A text from Claire. "Board members are waiting. Where are you? This isn't like you, Mr. Pierce." Alexander typed a response with trembling fingers. Family emergency. The words felt foreign, yet somehow right. Family. He had a family. Somewhere between saving a little girl and recognizing her mother, everything he thought he knew about his life had changed. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Legacy isn't just about buildings and bank accounts, son. Sometimes it's about the marks we leave on other people's lives. And tomorrow at 9 a.m., he would begin to understand just how much his legacy had already grown without his knowledge. Alexander arrived at the daily grind 30 minutes early, his usual table abandoned in favor of one with a clear view of the door. For the first time in years, he dismissed his driver, preferring to walk the 8 blocks from his penthouse. The morning air had done little to calm his racing thoughts. "Your usual, Mr. Pierce?" asked Sarah, the barista who had been serving him his morning Americano for the past 3 years. "Not today," he replied, surprising them both. "I'll wait." The words felt foreign in his mouth. Alexander Pierce didn't wait. People waited for him. He checked his phone, responding to urgent emails with uncharacteristic brevity. The merger he'd neglected yesterday was threatening to fall apart, but he couldn't bring himself to care. His world had narrowed to this moment, this coffee shop, and the answers he desperately needed. At precisely 8:57 a.m., Emma walked through the door. She wore a simple navy blazer over a white blouse, her copper hair twisted into a neat bun. Professional, controlled, ready for battle. Alexander recognized the armor for what it was. He wore similar defenses every day. "You're early," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "You're not surprised." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "You were always precisely on time. I remember that about you." The weight of 7 years hung between them. Alexander signaled Sarah, who appeared with practiced efficiency. Emma ordered a chai latte and Alexander finally got his Americano. They waited in tense silence until their drinks arrived. "Sophie?" he asked, unable to wait any longer. "At school. St. Catherine's." Emma wrapped her hands around her mug. "She's safe. They've increased security after yesterday's incident. Were you ever going to tell me?" Emma's fingers tightened on her cup. "I tried. 3 times, actually. I came to your office building. The first time I made it to the lobby before I lost my nerve. The second time your assistant said you were in Tokyo for 2 weeks. The third time—" She took a shaky breath. "The third time I saw you on the cover of Seattle Business Monthly, announcing your engagement to Victoria Hamilton." Alexander's jaw clenched. The engagement had been brief, more a business arrangement than a romance, dissolving before it ever became official. That was 4 years ago. By then I'd convinced myself it was better this way. Sophie was happy, thriving. You were building your empire. I didn't want to complicate your life. Complicate my life? Alexander's voice rose slightly, earning curious glances from nearby tables. He lowered it with effort. "She's my daughter, Emma. I had a right to know." "Did you?" Emma's eyes flashed. "The night we met, you told me you never wanted children, that they didn't fit into your 10-year plan for Pierce Technologies, that your father had taught you that family was a distraction from true success." The memory hit him like a physical blow. He had said those things, hadn't he? Young, ambitious, and so certain of his path. People change. Do they? Emma set down her cup. "Look me in the eye and tell me you would have been ready for a baby 7 years ago. Tell me you wouldn't have seen us as an obstacle to your goals." Alexander opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. The truth was, he didn't know. 7 years ago, he had been so focused on proving himself, on building his father's company into something greater, that everything else had seemed insignificant. "Sophie asks about her father," Emma continued softly. "I told her he was a good man, who didn't know about her. I never wanted her to feel abandoned." "What else?" Alexander leaned forward. "Tell me about her, please." Something in his voice must have reached Emma, because her expression softened. "She's brilliant. Top of her class in mathematics. She loves puzzles and building things. She took apart her tablet last month just to see how it worked. She put it back together, too." Pride swelled in Alexander's chest. "Like her father," he murmured. "Like her father," Emma agreed. "She has your determination. Once she sets her mind to something, there's no stopping her. But she has a softness, too. She rescues injured birds, helps younger students with their homework. Emma's voice caught. "She's the best of both of us." Alexander pulled out his phone, fingers shaking slightly as he pulled up his calendar. I want to know her, Emma. Not just facts and stories. I want to be part of her life. It's not that simple. Why not? Because she's 6, Alexander. She's sensitive, emotional. I can't just spring a father on her and hope for the best. And you, she gestured at his pristine suit, his carefully ordered appearance. Your life isn't exactly set up for playground visits and school pickups. I'll change it. Just like that? Just like that. The certainty in his voice surprised even him. I've spent 7 years building a company. I've missed 6 years of my daughter's life. I won't miss any more. Emma studied him for a long moment. You really mean that, don't you? I do. Alexander pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. Not his usual one with just his office number, but the private one with his personal cell. I know we need to take this slowly for Sophie's sake, but please, Emma, let me try. She took the card, running her thumb over the embossed letters. She has a dance recital next Friday. Nothing major, just her ballet class performing for the parents. But if you wanted to come, she looked up at him. You'd have to sit in the back, watch from a distance. She can't know who you are. Not yet. I'll be there. The words came instantly. What time? 7 p.m., the community center on Pine Street. Emma stood, gathering her purse. I should go. I have a gallery opening to prepare for. You're still in art. A real smile this time, small but genuine. I own the Carter Gallery on First Avenue. We specialize in emerging Pacific Northwest artists. I know it, Alexander said, surprised. My company bought 2 pieces from there last month. I didn't realize that it was mine. I kept my name off the publicity materials. Didn't want to trade on our connection. She hesitated. The pieces you bought? The abstract sculptures? Sophie helped me choose them for the collection. She has quite an eye for art. The coincidence, if it was a coincidence, left Alexander momentarily speechless. How many times had their lives almost intersected over the years? Friday at 7, Emma repeated. Don't be late. I won't be. Alexander remained seated as she left, his coffee growing cold before him. Through the window he watched her walk away, her posture straight, but her steps less guarded than when she'd arrived. His phone buzzed. Claire, reminding him about a board meeting in 30 minutes. For the first time in his career, Alexander Pierce texted back, "Reschedule it." Then he opened his browser and typed, "Ballet recital etiquette." He had a lot to learn before Friday. The community center's auditorium buzzed with excitement as parents filed in, armed with cameras and flowers. Alexander sat in the back row, feeling oddly vulnerable in his casual attire, dark jeans and a charcoal sweater, chosen carefully to blend in with the other parents. His usual suits would have made him stand out too much in this setting. A program lay crumpled in his hands. St. Catherine's Academy Junior Ballet presents Spring Dreams. Sophie's name was listed among the other young dancers. Sophie Pierce, he thought, testing the name in his mind. Except she wasn't Sophie Pierce. She was Sophie Carter. Another reminder of all he had missed. The lights dimmed, and a piano began to play. Alexander leaned forward as young dancers in pink tutus fluttered onto the stage. His heart stopped when he spotted Sophie, her copper curls tucked neatly into a ballet bun. She moved with a grace that seemed beyond her years, her face serious with concentration. "That's my granddaughter," whispered an elderly woman next to him proudly, pointing to another young dancer. "Which one is yours?" Alexander's throat tightened. "The one with the red hair," he found himself saying. The words felt both foreign and right on his tongue. "Oh, Sophie Carter. She's in my Emily's class. Such a bright little thing." Alexander nodded, unable to trust his voice. On stage, Sophie executed a perfect turn, her small face breaking into a smile that lit up the entire auditorium. He pulled out his phone discreetly, recording a few seconds of her dance. He wanted to remember every moment. After the performance, parents crowded forward with bouquets and hugs. Alexander remained in his seat, watching as Emma presented Sophie with a small bunch of pink roses. His daughter's face glowed with pride as she threw her arms around her mother's neck. His phone vibrated. A text from Emma. "There's a side door by the water fountain. Meet us there in 10 minutes. Alexander's heart raced as he made his way through the building's maze-like corridors. He found Emma and Sophie waiting, his daughter still in her ballet costume, a warm-up jacket thrown over it. "Sophie," Emma said gently, "this is my friend Alexander, the one who helped you in the park." Sophie looked up at him with those startlingly familiar green eyes. "Thank you for saving me," she said solemnly, then broke into a bright smile. "Did you see me dance?" "I did," Alexander replied, kneeling to her level. "You were magnificent. Mom says I need to practice my pirouettes more, but I think I did okay." "More than okay," he assured her, fighting the urge to brush back a stray curl that had escaped her bun. "I especially liked your solo part." Sophie beamed. "That's my favorite too. Mom, can we get ice cream to celebrate?" Emma hesitated, glancing at Alexander. "Actually, sweetheart, would it be okay if Alexander joined us?" Sophie's face lit up. "Do you like ice cream?" she asked him seriously. "I do," Alexander replied, equally serious, "although I haven't had it in a while." "That's sad," Sophie declared. "Everyone should have ice cream, especially after performances." 10 minutes later, they sat in a nearby ice cream parlor, Sophie happily demolishing a strawberry sundae while Alexander and Emma picked at their own desserts. Alexander couldn't take his eyes off his daughter, memorizing every gesture, every expression. "I want to be an architect," Sophie announced between bites. "Or maybe an astronaut. Or both." "Both is good," Alexander said, catching Emma's amused glance. "I wanted to be an astronaut too when I was your age." "Really? What happened?" "I became a different kind of builder. I build companies instead of rockets." Sophie considered this. "That sounds boring," she decided. "I'd rather build real things." Alexander laughed, surprising himself. When was the last time he had laughed so freely? You might be right. The evening continued, Sophie chattering about school, ballet, and her dreams of designing buildings in space. Alexander drank in every word, storing them away like precious gems. But as Sophie's energy began to fade, Emma caught his eye. "Time to head home, sweetheart," she said. "It's been a big day." Sophie yawned, then turned to Alexander. "Will you come to my next recital?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at Emma, who gave a slight nod. "I'd love to." After they said goodbye, Alexander watched them walk to Emma's car, Sophie's small hand trustingly in her mother's. His phone buzzed. Another text from Emma. "Thank you for tonight. She liked you." Alexander stared at the message for a long moment before replying, "She's amazing. You've done an incredible job with her." But as he walked back to his car, a new determination settled over him. Being a distant observer in his daughter's life wasn't enough. He needed to make changes, real changes, if he wanted to be the father Sophie deserved. The next morning, Alexander called an emergency board meeting at Pierce Technologies. The board members filed in, clearly confused by the unusual timing and his casual attire. He hadn't bothered changing from the jeans and sweater he'd worn to the recital. "I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations," he announced without preamble. The room erupted in concerned murmurs. "Not retiring," he clarified, "but I'm promoting Claire to COO. She knows this company as well as I do, and it's time I focused on other priorities." "Mr. Pierce," one of the older board members began, "this is highly irregular. The shareholders will be fine," Alexander cut in. "Our stock is strong, our projects are solid, and Claire is more than capable. I'll remain as CEO and handle major decisions, but I need balance." After the meeting, he sat alone in his office, looking out at the Seattle skyline. Claire knocked and entered, her expression concerned. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "You've worked so hard to build this company." Alexander turned to her. "Did you know I bought art from the Carter Gallery?" "Of course. I arranged the purchase myself. The pieces are in the lobby. My daughter helped choose those pieces." The words still felt strange on his tongue. "My 6-year-old daughter, who I didn't know existed until last week, has better taste in art than I do. She wants to be an architect and an astronaut. She dances ballet, and she thinks what I do is boring." He smiled. "She's right." Claire's eyes widened with understanding. The family emergency wasn't an emergency at all. It was a beginning. Alexander stood, straightening his casual sweater with the same precision he usually reserved for his suits. "I've spent 6 years of her life focused on this company. I won't miss any more." "What will you do?" "Learn about ballet, buy ice cream, figure out how to be a father." He picked up his phone, sending a quick text to Emma. "Can we talk about everything?" Her reply came moments later. "Dinner tomorrow. My place. Sophie has a play date." Alexander smiled, typing his response. "I'll be there." As he looked back at the Seattle skyline, he realized something had shifted inside him. The emptiness that had echoed through his glass and chrome empire was filling with something new: hope, fear, love, emotions he had kept carefully controlled for so long. His father had been wrong. Legacy wasn't just about buildings and bank accounts. Sometimes it was about second chances and small hands sticky with ice cream. Sometimes it was about letting go of control and learning to build something far more precious than a business empire. Tomorrow he would have dinner with Emma, and they would figure out how to tell Sophie the truth. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever was. But for the first time in his life, Alexander Pierce was ready to build something without a blueprint, something that couldn't be controlled or predicted. He was ready to be a father. Emma's townhouse sat on a quiet street in Queen Anne, its modest exterior belying the warmth within. Alexander stood at the door, a bottle of wine in one hand and a small gift bag in the other. He had spent hours choosing the gift, a building set designed for young engineers, something he hoped would appeal to Sophie's interests, though he couldn't give it to her yet. Emma opened the door, looking different from her gallery owner persona, in soft jeans and an oversized sweater. The casual attire made her look more like the woman he'd met 7 years ago. "Come in," she said, taking the wine. "I made pasta." The interior was exactly what he'd expect from an art curator. Walls adorned with carefully chosen pieces, shelves filled with books and small sculptures. But there were also signs of Sophie everywhere. A ballet shoe peeking out from under a chair, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, crayon drawings proudly displayed alongside professional artwork. "She's at her best friend Lily's house," Emma explained, leading him to the kitchen. "They have sleepovers every other Friday. It's their tradition." Alexander nodded, noting how Emma had planned this conversation for a time when Sophie would be safely away. The kitchen smelled of garlic and herbs, homey and inviting, so different from his sterile penthouse with its professional chef and perfect place settings. "I saw the announcement," Emma said, stirring something on the stove, "about you stepping back from Pierce Technologies. It's all over the business news." "The board wasn't happy," Alexander admitted, accepting the glass of wine she offered. "But they'll adapt. Claire will make an excellent COO." "Are you sure about this?" Emma turned to face him. "Your company has been your whole life." "That's exactly the problem." Alexander set down his wine. "I've spent years building something I thought would be my legacy. But legacy isn't just about business. My father taught me that success meant sacrifice, that personal relationships were a distraction. I believed him for so long, too long." Emma was quiet for a moment, adding the final touches to their meal. "Your father, he passed away, didn't he? I remember reading about it. 4 years ago. Heart attack in his office. He died doing what he loved. Working." Alexander's laugh held no humor. "I don't want that to be my story, Emma. I don't want to miss any more of Sophie's life." They settled at the dining table, the conversation pausing as Emma served the pasta. Alexander took a bite, surprised by the simple perfection of it. "This is amazing." "Sophie's favorite," Emma smiled. "She helps me make it sometimes. She likes to experiment with the spices, not always successfully." "Tell me more about her," Alexander said. "Everything." And so Emma did. She told him about Sophie's first steps, her first words, book, not mama or dada, how she had taught herself to read at 4, devouring every story she could find. Her passion for building things started early. She would stack blocks higher than herself, crying in frustration when they fell, only to start again with determination. "She gets that from you," Emma said softly. "That refusal to give up. She gets her creativity from you," Alexander countered. "The way she sees the world differently. Like at the recital. She wasn't just dancing, she was telling a story." They moved to the living room, the wine and conversation flowing more easily now. Emma pulled out photo albums. Sophie's first day of school, birthdays, holidays. Alexander drank in every image, trying to fill the 6-year void in his heart. "I want to tell her," he said finally. "Not right away, but soon. I want her to know she has a father who loves her, who wants to be part of her life. But I'll follow your lead on this, Emma. You know her best." Emma was quiet for a long moment, turning her wine glass in her hands. "She's been asking more questions lately. About you. I think she's ready, but we need to do this right." "How?" "Slowly. Let her get to know you first as my friend. Let her trust you. Then we can tell her together." Emma set down her glass. "But Alexander, if we do this, if we tell her, you have to be sure. She's not a business deal you can walk away from if it gets complicated. I've never been more sure of anything, Alexander said firmly. I'll prove it to both of you. And over the next few weeks, he did. He attended Sophie's science fair, watching proudly from the back as she explained her project on renewable energy. He happened to run into them at the park, joining their weekend picnics. Each time, Sophie's face lit up a little more when she saw him. One Saturday, as they watched Sophie feeding ducks by the pond, Emma turned to him. She asked about you yesterday. Alexander's heart skipped. What did she say? She asked why you didn't have any kids of your own because you're so good with children. Emma's eyes held a mix of amusement and tenderness. She also said you look like her, especially when you're thinking hard about something. She's observant. She's your daughter. Emma touched his arm gently. I think it's time. They planned it carefully. The next weekend, they took Sophie to the Children's Museum, one of her favorite places. After a day of exploring exhibits and doing science experiments, they sat in the museum's cafe, Sophie happily devouring an ice cream sundae. Sophie, Emma began gently, remember how you've asked about your dad? Sophie nodded, suddenly serious. You said he was a good man who didn't know about me. That's right. Emma glanced at Alexander, who felt his heart hammering. What would you think if I told you that's not true anymore? That he knows about you now and he wants very much to be part of your life? Sophie's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Her green eyes, his eyes, darted between them. Is that why Alexander looks like me? Alexander's breath caught. Emma had been right. She was ready. Yes, sweetheart, he said softly. That's exactly why. Sophie set down her spoon, her small face scrunched in concentration. Are you my dad? I am. Alexander fought to keep his voice steady. And I want you to know that if I had known about you earlier, I would have been here. I would have been at every ballet recital, every science fair. I'm so sorry I missed so much. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be here for everything else. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, in a small voice, Can I still call you Alexander? Until I'm ready for... The other word? You can call me anything you want, he assured her, fighting back tears. We can take this as slowly as you need. Sophie nodded, then did something that surprised them both. She got up and hugged him. Alexander wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of ice cream and strawberry shampoo, memorizing every detail of this moment. Is this why you stopped working so much? Sophie asked, pulling back to look at him. Mom showed me the article about your company. Yes, Alexander smiled. Some things are more important than work. Later that night, after dropping Sophie off at home with promises of more time together soon, Alexander and Emma stood on her doorstep. That went better than I expected, Emma admitted. She's amazing, Alexander said. You did such an incredible job with her, Emma. I know I keep saying it, but it's true. Emma looked up at him, her eyes soft in the porch light. We did pretty well today, didn't we? As a team? We did. Alexander stepped closer. Emma, I know we have a lot to figure out, and Sophie comes first, but she silenced him with a kiss, soft and sweet, and tasting of hope. When they parted, both were smiling. I think, Emma said, that sometimes the best families are built slowly, with patience and love and second chances. Alexander pulled her close again, thinking of the little girl who now had both parents in her life, of the woman who had given him the greatest gift imaginable, of the future they could build together. Second chances, he agreed, kissing her again. And this time I'm not letting go. Above them, stars twinkled in the Seattle sky, witnesses to a family being rebuilt, one moment at a time. Sometimes, Alexander realized, the most precious things in life come not from careful planning, but from the beautiful chaos of chance and love and forgiveness. And sometimes, the best legacies are written not in boardrooms and bank accounts, but in ballet recitals, ice cream sundaes, and the unfolding story of a father, a mother, and the daughter who brought them back together.